Okay, so we spoke about the oil and gas, but what can you tell us about the coastal mining in Ireland? Are there any types of natural reserves which exist here?
Most of the mining activity around the coastlines of Ireland is historical.
So it took place in the past and it stopped now?
It took place in the past. Now, rather strangely, Ireland is a major metalliferous province and a well-known mining area, but that is a new development from the 1960s onwards, where we have a number of major lead-zinc deposits inland in the areas of Carboniferous limestone. At places like Tina in Galway and Navan in County Meath. But in the past, strangely, between the two episodes, children in Ireland were taught that there were no natural resources in Ireland. A lot of older people who went to school will tell you that they were actually told that at school, that there was. But in the 19th century, Ireland was quite a well-known producer, particularly of copper. And they...
Is it mostly along the south coast, around Waterford?
Yes, it's mainly in southwest Ireland and along the south coast in Waterford and so on.
That's what now turned into National Park, like Copper Coast, is it?
Yes, and it's interesting, by chance, in a geological sense, those deposits were near the coast. And they tend to have had a larger impact on what you see now along the coast of Ireland than the oil and gas operations have had. Because in those days, the deposits were narrow vein deposits which were manually mined and manually high-graded, cobbed by breaking down the pieces of ore and taking out the best lumps. And this work was done mainly by women and children at the surface. And of course, labour was cheap, very cheap, and you could afford to work those sorts of deposits. They needed people, so you tend to get even a number of places along the south coast. You'll see a row of mining cottages alongside an old adit, and cobbing floors, and chimneys for smelting and but mainly for driving engines, and sometimes explosive huts for keeping the explosives in. These were part of the mining operation, and it was high intensity, so you still see the ruins of those places now, old chimneys and so on.
It impacted on the landscape, on the coastal landscape.
Yeah, and they impacted, and often along the coast, because the rocks were well exposed, people could see maybe green staining due to copper. And so they would drive and add it into the cliff or very close to the cliff line, so that you can see those places dotted around southwest Ireland. Elsewhere in the country, there was some working of zinc and lead in small amounts here and there. Along the coast of Antrim, there was coal mining in the Ballycastle area, and also bauxite, laterite mining in the same region there in Antrim. So you get quite a lot of activity around the coast. Probably the largest and best known mine in the southwest is the Alahis mine at the end of the Beira Peninsula, where a deep and very profitable mine was sunk there over a number of decades, and to the extent that moving the men up and down into the drive actually required the building of a man engine, which was a Cornish designed operation where men were moved up and down on small platforms underground and driven from the surface, and very visible above the village of Alahis.
So you mean physically two people standing and moving the platform?
People stepped onto, they were a series of moving platforms, and if you wanted to go
similar
up,
to the ones that they have on children playgrounds now.
Yeah, that's right. But you just stepped onto them and it went up, and the other side it went down. These were called man engines, and they're the only one and the best and well preserved is at above the village of Alahis in West Cork, and it has recently undergone restoration, and there is also in the village a museum documenting the mining. So that's an interesting feature there, and in Waterford, along what was called the Copper Coast, there's a geopark there with some funding from Europe that's also an excellent place to visit. So.
And do you know, is there any mining for silver or gold?
It's
not close.
And they just mainly for copper. In Southwest Ireland, there was also barytes, and that was looked at again and for a few years mined at the Ladyswell mine to high grade. Barite is used in the drilling mud in the oil industry because you need the weight against any potential pressure in the oil and gas underground to keep it down there. And barite, which is very heavy, is added to the mud, and because these veins were high grade, they were temporarily reworked in the 1970s. But as with a lot of these deposits, they were vein deposits, and they require a lot of intensive manual labor and are not really suitable for large-scale equipment. And it became increasingly difficult for deposits of that sort to compete with the giant or the lower grade deposits elsewhere in South America and North America and so on. So gradually the mining went out, and it wasn't until the discovery of first of all Tina in County Galway that we realized that in fact we were part of a lead zinc province, which has had an impact. It had the Tina mine led to developments of Galway port, and the Navan production is shipped out first of all by rail to Drogheda and then down to Dublin and goes out by ship there. So obviously there's some benefit even from the inland mines onto the coastline, but suppose I'd like to say that I'm still although I've been working in the offshore of Ireland for the last more than 40 years, I'm still hopeful that this new wave of interest off the Atlantic coast and in the Porcupine Basin will lead to a discovery. I think there's a very reasonable chance that that's the case, because we can now look at these new ideas which weren't really accessible to the older seismic, that we can now see possibilities that we couldn't possibly have seen in the past. And I'm still hopeful that Ireland will end up with its own oil fields.
Okay, so maybe there's new discoveries to come in the near future.
I hope so.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave, for your time and this interesting conversation about
it's been
offshore
a pleasure.
Oil and gas and coastal mining, and we learned a lot. Thanks very much.
Thank you.